I'm Marjorie Bennett, 72. I live in a quiet neighborhood just north of Seattle, in the same two-story house my husband and I bought 40 years ago. The trees out front have grown taller than the roof line, and the mailbox still squeaks when you open it. Some days I sit on the porch with tea and listen to the wind shift through the branches, pretending that quiet is a choice. My son Evan and his wife Jillian pulled into the driveway around 10:30 a.m. last Saturday. They didn't even turn off the engine. Jillian waved from the passenger seat, sunglasses too big for her face. Evan leaned out the window and said they'd left instructions on the counter. Feed the cat, water the plants every other day, lock the back door twice at night. Then he added, smiling, that long flights weren't great for someone my age and it'd be best if I just stayed home. Safer, less complicated. I nodded like I always do. Waved as they backed out of the drive, the kids in the back giggling about sunblock and snorkeling. The van turned the corner. I stood there for a few seconds before going back inside. The house didn't feel different, but I did. I wasn't sad. Not quite. Just smaller. At 3:05 p.m., I checked the mailbox out of habit. Bills a gardening catalog I never ordered, and a plain white envelope with the local travel agency's logo stamped in the corner. It wasn't addressed to me, but I opened it anyway. Inside were 4 plane tickets. Seattle to Cancun, departing Tuesday morning. Evan, Jillian, and both kids. My name wasn't there. I read each ticket twice, hoping maybe it had just been missed. It hadn't. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The kettle had gone cold. I boiled it again and made tea. The act of steeping it, pouring slowly into the same blue mug I'd used for years, helped keep my hands from shaking. Tears didn't fall, but something heavy moved behind my ribs. A kind of ache that didn't need water to be real. I just sat there holding the envelope like it might change shape if I stared long enough. At 4:27 p.m., I picked up the phone and called the travel agency. The girl who answered sounded young, maybe in college. I gave her the booking number and told her I'd like to cancel the reservation. She asked why, but I said nothing. Just cancel them. Her voice shifted. A small pause, then a quiet confirmation. The tone you use when something doesn't feel quite right, but you're too polite to ask. I jotted down the cancellation code on the back of a grocery receipt and folded it into my wallet. Then I made another cup of tea and stood by the window. Outside, the sun was just beginning to slide behind the trees. The sky turned that faint orange that makes shadows stretch. Paul used to call it porch light hour. He'd died 12 years ago from a stroke that came too fast. I'd spent the years since taking care of everyone but myself. At 5:22 p.m., I pulled out the drawer under the phone and found my passport. Still valid for another 6 years. I checked my savings. $11,254. Enough. More than enough. No debt. No obligations. No one left who truly needed me. I booked a one-way flight to Florence. Departure Monday evening. Aisle seat. Paid extra for the option to change dates just in case I wanted to stay longer. It felt strange entering my own name into the traveler information field. Like I had to remind the world I existed. I went to the closet and pulled out the navy blue dress. The one I wore to Paul's memorial. Not out of grief, but because he always said I looked sharp in it. I held it up to the light. Still fit. A little dusty at the shoulders, but elegant. Then I found my good scarf. The silk one with the plum border I used to wear when I wanted to feel expensive. At 7:10 p.m., I polished my black flats with a cloth I found under the sink. I'd nearly forgotten how to do it. The movement felt ceremonial, like brushing off more than just dust. I packed a single suitcase, a pair of walking shoes, linen pants, the softest blouse I owned. No itinerary, just space and silence. I didn't write a note. I didn't send a message. I just set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., poured the last of the tea into the sink, and turned off the lights. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't drama. It was the first quiet moment in a very long time where I chose myself. The air in Florence smelled like old stone and lemons. I stepped out of the cab just past 10:30 a.m. and stood on the sidewalk with my small suitcase at my side, feeling slightly ridiculous and entirely awake. The driver waved and sped off. I didn't follow a map. I walked. The streets twisted like they'd been sketched by a hand that didn't believe in straight lines. Vespas buzzed past, men smoked in doorways, and laundry swayed above my head like flags of ordinary life. My hotel was tucked behind a florist's stall and a tabaki that sold postcards older than I was. The man at the front desk called me madam without blinking and gave me a real key. Brass and heavy attached to a worn leather fob. I liked the weight of it. The room was small, no frills, but the window opened onto a courtyard filled with vines and noise. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, listening. No one needed me. No one even knew I was here. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. That afternoon, I walked until my feet throbbed. I bought a cone of pistachio gelato from a man who looked like he'd been scooping it for 50 years. I didn't take a picture. I didn't even look at my phone. I just stood by the river and let the cold sweetness melt on my tongue, while the water shimmered with light I hadn't seen in years. People passed. No one looked twice. That was the gift of Florence. You could vanish here, not into nothingness, but into the quiet comfort of being part of the background. For someone who'd spent so long being furniture in her own family, it felt like kindness. On the third morning, just before 8:15 a.m., I sat at a tiny cafe near the Duomo, stirring a cup of bitter coffee that didn't pretend to like sugar. A woman slid into the seat beside me without asking. Wide hat, sharp lipstick, 74 if I had to guess. French accent, slight. She glanced at my toast and frowned. "You use too much butter," she said. I smiled without looking up. "Better than too little." She grunted her approval. Her name was Isabelle Leclerc, retired educator, widowed 12 years, traveling alone. She told me this in the same tone you'd use to recite grocery items. I liked her immediately. We walked that afternoon, slowly. Two women with no particular place to be. She noticed things. A chipped cherub above a doorway. The way sunlight hit the side of the cathedral just right around 3 o'clock. I told her I hadn't walked this much in years. She told me I hadn't walked with purpose in years, and there's a difference. She was right. We met again the next day. And the one after that. We strolled markets and side streets. We ate bread still warm from the oven and olives that made our eyes water. I laughed more that week than I had in the last decade. Isabel carried herself like someone who'd been underestimated before and learned to enjoy it. At lunch one day under a striped awning with wine neither of us could pronounce, she tilted her head at me. "They tell you you're too old." I paused. "My son. His wife." "Yes." She sipped slowly, eyes sharp. "Let them. But don't you ever say it again. Reclaim your space." She said it like a command, and I felt something loosen in my chest. My phone buzzed that night. Missed calls. 4 from Evan, 2 from Jillian. One message said they were at the airport and the tickets were missing. Another asked if I'd seen them. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then turned it off. Not out of spite, out of quiet. There was nothing left to explain. The next morning, I bought a postcard at a stand near the cathedral. I hadn't planned to write anyone. but my fingers moved before I had time to think. Dear Nora, I'm in Florence. The buildings are pink and gold and the sky smells like fresh bread. I hope you're smiling today. Love, Grandma. I mailed it after lunch. Dropped it into the red box outside the cafe where Isabel and I met. She wasn't there that day. She'd gone to the museum alone, but she left me a note on hotel stationery. You looked like someone who needed a mirror. Thank you for reflecting me. I folded it into my wallet. That night, I stood by my window while bells rang from 3 directions at once. I was still old, still alone. But for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. Florence had said my name softly in stone and shadow and strangers' faces. I said it back, and it stayed. Lisbon greeted us with warm stone and crooked charm. The streets gleamed from a morning rain, and the sidewalks shimmered like they held memory instead of water. Our room had blue shutters that creaked when opened, and a view of the square where kids kicked soccer balls between iron benches. Isabel was quiet the first evening. She said it was nothing, just a little off. By the next morning, her face was pale and her voice thin. She waved me off with her hand, told me to go out and see the city, but I didn't. I made her tea and read to her from a book we picked up in Florence. The pages smelled like old dust and quiet afternoons. She drifted in and out of sleep while I sat by the window watching the rhythm of Lisbon move without us. The world didn't feel like it was passing me by. For the first time, it felt like I had stepped out of line on purpose. At 10:40 a.m., I checked my phone. One message stood out. It was from Nora, a voice recording. Her words were soft, unsure at first. She said the family was spinning, that they didn't know what I was trying to prove. But she did. She said she got it. That sometimes when people keep leaving you out, you stop waiting for the door to open and just walk through a different one. She said she missed me. That she'd never seen me look happier than in the photo I didn't even know Isabel had taken. I listened twice. Then a third time. My hands shook, but it wasn't from sadness. It was relief. I sat on the edge of the bed, turned the phone around in my hands like it was something new. I opened the voice memo app and hit record. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Evan, I'm not angry. I want you to know that. But I am changed. I've spent most of my life waiting to be asked, to be needed, to be seen. And sometimes, yes, I was. But most of the time I was just there. The steady hand. The person who kept things running while everyone else lived. I don't say this to blame you. I say it because it's true. I love you. I always will. But I'm not coming back to the role you put me in. If you want me in your life, it has to be as a person. A whole one, that's all. I stopped the recording. I didn't replay it. I sent it. No filter. No second version. The phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. I slipped it into the drawer next to Isabel's sleeping tea and walked out to the balcony. The air smelled of citrus and wet tile. A man played a song in the square below. Fado. That ancient ache curled into melody. It didn't matter that I didn't speak Portuguese. I felt every word. By 2:20 p.m., Isabel was feeling better. Color back in her cheeks. Voice stronger. She scolded me gently for not going out. I told her I didn't need Lisbon's postcards that day. I already had the only moment I came for. We sat in silence after that. The kind you share when words aren't needed anymore. That evening, we planned our next stop. Seville. Isabel had always wanted to see flamenco in its proper home. I agreed without hesitation. Something in me had lifted, not fully gone, but no longer crushing, like grief that learned how to breathe. As we packed, she asked if I was nervous. I shook my head. I'd already done the scariest thing. I'd spoken plainly. without anger, without apology. The message might hurt or confuse, but it was honest. That was enough for now. The rest would come in its own time. Before bed, I sat by the window again. The city below buzzed in low voices and distant music. I thought of Nora's voice, her quiet certainty, and of mine, finally steady. For the first time, my silence wasn't a burden. It was a boundary, and that felt like peace. The house looked the same. Porch still swept. Ivy still curling near the steps. Carol had kept everything in place, even the plants on the window sill. I walked through the rooms like I was borrowing them. Touched the edges of picture frames. The old quilt folded neatly on the couch. The chipped ceramic bowl on the kitchen table. Nothing had moved, but everything felt quieter. Not empty. Just waiting. At 2:37 p.m., the doorbell rang. I didn't rush. Nora stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, a folded piece of paper in her hand. She didn't say hello, just hugged me tight the way she used to before middle school made her awkward. We sat at the kitchen table. She handed me the drawing. Me standing at the water's edge, scarf in the wind arms open to the sea. Underneath she'd written, "She didn't return the same, and that was the point." I pressed the edge of the paper flat with my palm and looked at her. She shrugged and said it felt right. I told her I'd frame it. She smiled and said she hoped I would. We didn't say much after that, just made tea the way I always did. She didn't ask about Lisbon or Seville. She just sat and waited like she knew more was coming. At 4:15 p.m., Evan and Jillian arrived. They rang the bell even though the door was unlocked. I let them in without comment. Evan looked older, tired around the eyes. Jillian held a small plant in a ceramic pot like a peace offering. We stood in the hallway longer than necessary. Then I turned and walked to the dining room. They followed. We sat. Nora stayed beside me. Jillian spoke first, her voice low. She said they didn't mean to hurt me, that leaving me out wasn't about cruelty. It was about fear. My aging scared them, not because they thought I couldn't manage, but because it reminded them of what was coming for all of us. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't had the words until now. I looked at her, then Evan. They both waited. I didn't raise my voice. I just said what needed saying. I'll be at your table if I'm welcomed as a person, not a placeholder, not someone who fills the silence when others are busy. Evan nodded. Jillian nodded too. That was enough for the moment. Dinner wasn't perfect. The conversation stuttered. The salad was overdressed, but no one rushed to fill the quiet. Halfway through, Nora cleared her throat and unfolded a piece of paper from her backpack. She said it was something she'd written, a list, inspired by mine. She asked if she could read it. I said yes. She began. Things I want to remember. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up with its hands open. Silence isn't the same as peace. Visibility is not vanity. And love is not smaller just because someone got older. Her voice cracked once. Then she kept going. When she finished, we all sat very still. Evan looked at me. Not with guilt. Just something close to recognition. Jillian reached for a napkin but didn't say a word. Nora folded the list and placed it beside her plate. Then we kept eating. Slowly. Like we were learning how to sit with one another again. After they left, I stood at the door alone for a while. The night air was soft. Crickets somewhere beyond the fence. I made a pot of chamomile and sat by the window with my journal, the one I'd carried from Florence to Lisbon to Seville. I flipped to the last page and wrote, "I was never too old." I just stopped waiting for someone to ask if I still dreamed. I closed the book and set it beside the drawing. The table felt full, not with noise, not with people, but with presence. Real, earned, chosen. The chair I sat in didn't feel borrowed anymore. It felt like mine. And for the first time, they were starting to see it too.